My sister called me at midnight. Don't come home. Dad isn't dad anymore. So, I stayed away. Olivia's voice was barely a whisper when she called me at 12:03 a.m. on a Wednesday night, and the first thing I noticed was that she was hiding somewhere, speaking so quietly I had to press my phone hard against my ear to hear her at all. Nathan, don't come home tomorrow like you planned. Please, just trust me on this. I was in my apartment in Chicago, 300 miles from our childhood home in Indiana, where I'd been planning to visit for the long weekend. I'd talked to both my parents on Sunday, confirmed I'd arrive Friday afternoon, same as always. Nothing had seemed wrong. Nothing had seemed remotely off. But my sister's voice carried a tremor that made my stomach drop because Olivia didn't scare easily, hadn't since she was 8, and broke her arm falling from the garage roof without crying once. What's going on? Is someone hurt? I asked, already reaching for my laptop to check flights, thinking maybe Mom had fallen or there'd been an accident. Dad isn't dad anymore, she said, and the way she phrased it, the specific word choice, made every hair on my neck stand straight. Not Dad's acting weird or Dad's sick, but isn't Dad, like she was reporting an objective fact rather than a perception. I'm in my closet right now, and I can hear him walking around downstairs talking to Mom, and he sounds exactly like Dad. But Nathan, I swear to God, he doesn't know things. He doesn't remember things. He's getting basic facts about our family wrong, and when I corrected him at dinner, he looked at me like I was the crazy one. I'd been living in Chicago for 6 years, ever since I started my graduate program in data analytics at Northwestern, and I made it home to Terre Haute maybe once every 6 weeks to see my parents and check on Olivia, who was finishing her senior year of high school and planning to attend Indiana University in the fall. Our family was aggressively normal in every measurable way. Dad, Richard Carlisle, worked as a regional sales manager for an industrial equipment company, the kind of job that involved a lot of spreadsheets and quarterly reports, but reasonable hours and steady income. Mom, Claire, taught 3rd grade at the elementary school 3 blocks from our house and had done so for 22 years. They'd been married 30 years, owned the same 4-bedroom colonial since before I was born, and their idea of rebellion was staying up past 10 on weeknights to watch crime dramas. Nothing in their lives suggested the kind of situation that would make my sister hide in her closet at midnight. What kind of facts is he getting wrong? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm while my brain spun through possibilities. Early onset dementia could cause memory issues, but Dad was only 53. A stroke might cause confusion, but surely Mom would have taken him to the hospital. He didn't know what year they bought the house, Olivia said, her voice cracking slightly. Mom mentioned something about the roof needing repair again, and Dad said, we've only had it 8 years, it shouldn't need work yet. And Nathan, they bought this house in 1996. They've owned it for 30 years. When Mom corrected him, he laughed it off like he'd misspoken, but I watched his face and he wasn't joking. He genuinely didn't know. The detail hit wrong because my father had an almost photographic memory for dates and numbers, the kind of brain that could recite the exact closing costs of their house purchase or the specific mileage on every car he'd ever owned. He'd helped me memorize historical timelines for AP exams by creating elaborate mental frameworks based on numerical patterns. The idea that he'd be off by 2 decades on something as fundamental as when he bought his own house wasn't just wrong, it was impossible. Maybe he's exhausted? Or on new medication? I was grasping for rational explanations while Olivia's breathing got faster on the other end. I thought that too, so I tested him more. I asked if he remembered taking me to the emergency room when I broke my arm, and he said yes. But Nathan, he said it was my left arm. It was my right. I showed him the scar, and he stared at it like he'd never seen it before, then said he misremembered. But you don't misremember which arm your daughter broke. And there's more. He smells different. His cologne is wrong. The way he holds his fork is different. He keeps forgetting to take off his shoes at the door even though Dad's been obsessive about that my entire life. It's like someone learned facts about our family from a file but doesn't actually have the memories. The way she laid it out, clinical and specific, made it worse because these weren't vague feelings or paranoid suspicions. These were concrete, observable details that didn't add up to anything except the impossible conclusion forming in both our minds. I'd been home 3 weeks ago for Mom's birthday dinner, and Dad had seemed completely normal then. We'd talked about my dissertation research, his latest client accounts, whether the Pacers had any chance at a playoff run. He'd told the same corny jokes he'd been recycling for years, remembered to ask about my girlfriend Amy, even though we'd broken up 2 months prior, which was classic Dad behavior, always a month behind on relationship updates, but trying to stay involved. Nothing had seemed remotely off or concerning. When did you first notice something was wrong? I asked, opening my laptop and starting to search for information on sudden personality changes, medical conditions that could explain this, anything that made sense within the bounds of normal reality. Olivia was quiet for a moment, and I could hear her shifting position, probably pressing deeper into her closet corner. He came back from that business trip 2 weeks ago, and something was different right away. He hugged Mom weird at the airport, like he wasn't sure how to hold her. She laughed about it, said he seemed tired from the flight, but I noticed. Then little things kept happening. He went to the wrong grocery store, the one on Elm instead of the one on Maple that we've been going to for 15 years. He ordered a coffee black when he's always taken it with cream and sugar. He called our neighbor Mr. Stevens Steve, when Dad has always been formal with him, always Mr. Stevens because that's how he was raised. These details stacked wrong, building a picture that my rational brain wanted to reject but couldn't quite dismiss. People didn't just suddenly become different people. Except Olivia was describing exactly that, a wholesale replacement of learned behaviors and memories that suggested something far stranger than a medical episode. Where was the business trip? I asked, starting a new search for Dad's company and recent travel. Denver. Some sales conference for the Western regional managers. He was gone 5 days, which is normal for these things. But Nathan, I looked at his suitcase when he unpacked and his clothes were wrong. Dad packs his red polo for every trip because he says it's his lucky shirt. It wasn't in there, and he had a pair of shoes I've never seen before, nice leather ones that looked expensive but not like anything Dad would buy. When I asked about them, he said he'd had them for years, but I've done laundry in this house my whole life, and I've never seen those shoes. The specificity of her observations hit me because Olivia had always been detail-oriented to the point of being annoying about it, the kind of person who noticed when someone moved furniture 2 inches or cut their hair a 1/4 inch. If she said the shoes were new and Dad claimed otherwise, I believed her perception over his claim. I pulled up the website for Dad's company, Mid-America Industrial Solutions, and found the events calendar. There had been a regional sales conference in Denver from the 8th through the 12th of last month, matching Olivia's timeline. The conference had over 200 attendees, all regional managers and sales directors from across the company's territory. Nothing about it seemed suspicious or unusual. Has Mom noticed anything wrong? I asked, trying to understand why our mother, who'd been married to this man for 3 decades, wouldn't have picked up on the same inconsistencies Olivia was reporting. That's what scares me most, Olivia said, her voice dropping even lower. She hasn't said anything. At dinner tonight, when he got the house purchase date wrong, she corrected him but didn't seem bothered that he'd made the mistake. Like she's either not noticing or she's pretending not to notice, and I don't know which is worse. I tried to talk to her earlier when Dad went to take a shower, asked if she thought he seemed different lately, and she got defensive. Said I was being paranoid and disrespectful, that Dad was under stress at work, and I should be more understanding. But Mom, she was acting weird too. Like she was protecting him from my questions instead of being concerned about obvious memory problems. The scenario Olivia was painting created an impossible choice in my brain. Either my sister was experiencing some kind of paranoid break and seeing patterns that weren't there, or something genuinely wrong was happening at home, and our mother was either oblivious or complicit. Neither option felt right. I'm driving down tomorrow, I said, already calculating the 6-hour route and what time I'd need to leave to arrive by afternoon. Don't, Olivia said immediately, urgent. That's why I called. If you show up, he'll know I told you something. I need you to not come home for the planned visit. Cancel it, say work came up or you're sick, whatever. I need time to figure out what's happening without him knowing I'm suspicious. And Nathan, I need you to help me prove this because I'm starting to think I'm losing my mind, except I know I'm not. I know my own father and this man living in our house isn't him. The conviction in her voice cut through my remaining skepticism because Olivia wasn't prone to dramatics or conspiracy theories. She was rational and measured, planning to study engineering at IU because she liked problems with clear solutions and verified answers. For her to make a claim this extreme meant she genuinely believed it, had tested it against her own doubt, and still reached this impossible conclusion. Okay, I said slowly, trying to think through a plan that wouldn't expose her or escalate whatever was happening. I'll cancel the visit, say a project deadline came up, but I need you to document everything, every wrong detail, every inconsistency, dates and times and specific quotes if you can remember them. We need evidence because what you're describing, if it's true, we'll need proof before anyone will take us seriously. I could hear her exhale, relief and fear mixed together. I've already started a list on my phone. I have 19 things so far that are wrong or different. I'll keep adding to it. But Nathan, what if I'm right? What if that's not Dad? Where is our real father? The question hung between us, too terrible to fully consider. If the man in their house wasn't Richard Carlisle, if some kind of replacement had happened, then where was my actual father and what had happened to him? The logical conclusions were all horrific. We'll figure it out, I told her, trying to sound certain despite having no idea how to even begin approaching this situation. Keep yourself safe. Act normal around him. Don't let him know you're suspicious. I'll do research on my end and we'll talk every night at the same time. Midnight seems safe since you can claim you're just texting friends if anyone asks why you're awake. We hung up, and I sat in my dark apartment staring at my laptop screen, trying to process what she'd told me. My first instinct was to search for medical conditions that could explain sudden personality changes and memory loss. Early-onset Alzheimer's could cause memory problems, but typically progressed gradually, not overnight. Brain tumors could affect personality and memory, but would likely cause other symptoms noticeable enough that Mom would have taken him to a doctor. Psychiatric breaks could alter behavior, but wouldn't change physical habits like cologne choices or shoe-wearing routines. I expanded my search to more extreme possibilities. Cases of mistaken identity where someone genuinely believed they were someone else. Dissociative fugue states where people forgot their entire lives and created new identities. But none of these explained the specific pattern Olivia described. Someone who knew enough about Richard Carlisle to pretend to be him, but lacked the deep memory and muscle memory that came from actually living his life. I found myself typing impossible things into search bars. Man replaced by lookalike. Identity theft, family members. Doppelganger living as someone else. The results were mostly fiction or conspiracy theories, nothing that helped explain a real-world situation. Around 3 a.m., exhausted and no closer to answers, I found a Reddit thread from 2 years ago where someone described a similar situation. Their uncle had returned from a business trip acting different, forgetting family details, behaving oddly. The thread had hundreds of comments, most calling the poster paranoid or suggesting the uncle had early dementia. But a few comments stood out, people who claimed similar experiences, family members who seemed wrong after extended absences. One comment, from a user whose account had since been deleted, described a situation eerily close to what Olivia had reported. Their brother had gone on a work trip to Las Vegas and returned 2 weeks later different. Wrong habits, forgotten memories, unfamiliar mannerisms. The family assumed stress or mental health issues until the original brother showed up 6 months later, alive and confused, claiming he'd been held somewhere against his will. The post claimed the imposter had been part of an identity theft ring that targeted men with good credit and stable lives, replacing them temporarily to rack up debt and commit financial fraud. The details were sparse, and the account deletion made verification impossible, but the story stuck with me because it offered a framework that was criminal rather than supernatural, something grounded in reality, even if barely. I screenshotted the thread and sent it to Olivia with a message. Found something. Not saying this is what's happening, but similar pattern. We'll call tomorrow. Her response came immediately. Still awake. That's terrifying, but at least it's an explanation that doesn't make me crazy. What do we do? I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew we needed professional help, someone who could investigate without alerting the man living in my parents' house that we were suspicious. The next morning, I called in sick to work, citing a stomach bug, and started making phone calls. First to Mom, keeping my voice casual and apologetic, as I explained I couldn't make the weekend visit due to a last-minute project emergency at work. She sounded disappointed but understanding, no hint that anything was wrong at home. Your father will be so sad to miss you, she said, and I listened carefully to her tone for any stress or concern. Nothing. She sounded exactly like herself, warm and slightly scattered, complaining about grading book reports and planning a garden redesign. Either she genuinely didn't notice anything wrong with Dad, or she was an incredible actress. How's he doing? I asked carefully. Dad mentioned some stress at work last time we talked. Mom laughed. Oh, you know your father, always worrying about quarterly reports and client accounts. But he's fine, healthy as ever. Actually, he's been in a great mood lately, whistling around the house and talking about taking a vacation this summer. I think the Denver conference energized him. The description didn't match Olivia's observations at all, which meant either Mom wasn't paying attention or my sister was seeing problems that weren't there. Except I knew Olivia, knew she didn't panic or exaggerate, and my gut said to trust her perception. After I hung up with Mom, I spent 3 hours researching private investigators in the Terre Haute area. I needed someone with experience in missing persons cases and identity fraud, someone who could investigate discreetly without alerting anyone in my family. I found Linda Ashford, a former detective who'd spent 20 years with the Indianapolis PD before going private. Her website featured testimonials from families she'd helped reunite and cases of fraud she'd uncovered. Her rates were steep, $200 an hour plus expenses, but I had savings, and this felt important enough to justify the cost. I called her office and got her assistant, explaining I needed to discuss a sensitive family matter involving possible identity fraud or confusion. The assistant scheduled me for a video call that afternoon with Linda herself. At 4 p.m., Chicago time, I logged into the video conference and found myself looking at a woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes and an expression that suggested she'd heard every possible story. Mr. Carlisle, she said, my name sounding official in her professional tone. Your assistant mentioned concerns about identity fraud within your family. Walk me through the situation. I laid out everything Olivia had told me, trying to stay factual and specific, rather than sounding paranoid. The wrong house purchase date, the broken arm confusion, the changed habits and missing memories. Linda listened without interrupting, taking notes on a legal pad I could see in the frame. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, studying her notes. These details, were they provided by your sister directly or filtered through your parents? Directly from my sister. She's 17, senior in high school, very observant and rational, not prone to conspiracy thinking or paranoia. Linda nodded slowly. And your mother hasn't noticed these discrepancies or hasn't commented on them? According to my sister, Mom either hasn't noticed or is dismissing them as stress-related memory problems. Won't engage when my sister tries to discuss concerns. Linda made another note. When was the last time you personally saw your father in person, close enough to verify physical details? I thought back. 3 weeks ago, late May. I was home for Mom's birthday. We had dinner together, talked for several hours. He seemed completely normal then, exactly like himself. And the business trip that preceded these behavioral changes occurred when exactly? Linda asked, flipping through her notes. June 8th through 12th, 5-day sales conference in Denver. He returned on the 13th, and according to my sister, seemed different immediately upon return. Linda leaned back in her chair, her expression difficult to read. "Mr. Carlyle, I'm going to be direct with you. What your sister is describing matches a pattern I've seen exactly 3 times in my career. Twice it was advanced dementia with confabulation, where the patient fills memory gaps with false information and genuinely believes it. Once, it was an actual case of identity substitution." The room felt colder suddenly, hearing a professional investigator confirm that identity substitution was even possible. "What was the substitution case?" I asked, my voice rough. "Man reported missing by his wife after failing to return from a fishing trip. 3 weeks later, someone matching his description showed up at their house claiming to be him, with his wallet and car keys, enough identification to convince local police. But the wife knew immediately something was wrong. Different mannerisms, forgotten private details, wrong habits. Turned out the real husband had been killed in a hiking accident and his body taken by someone who looked similar enough to attempt identity fraud. The imposter thought he could access bank accounts and assets by simply living as the victim. The clinical way she described it made my stomach turn. How did they prove it wasn't him?" Linda pulled up something on her computer, reading from what looked like case files. DNA test was the definitive proof, but they initially gathered evidence through knowledge testing. The wife worked with police to ask questions only her real husband would know. Deep childhood memories, private conversations, physical scars, and their origin stories. The imposter failed most of them. When confronted, he ran. They arrested him 2 states away trying to use the victim's credit cards. "So you're saying this is possible? Someone could actually be pretending to be my father?" My voice sounded distant to my own ears. Linda met my eyes through the screen. "I'm saying your sister's observations are concerning enough to warrant investigation. Whether that investigation reveals a medical issue, a psychological problem, or something more sinister, we won't know until we gather evidence. I can help with that, but I'll need cooperation from someone in the household who can observe and document without raising suspicion. Your sister sounds like she could handle that role, but she's a minor, which complicates things legally." "What would you need from her?" I asked, already knowing Olivia would agree to help however necessary. "Daily documentation of behavioral inconsistencies. Photos of any new possessions or items that don't match your father's known belongings. If possible, DNA samples. Hair from a brush or toothbrush, something we can potentially test against known samples from your father if we locate any. And most importantly, I need her to ask knowledge test questions. Things only your real father would know. Private family history that wouldn't be available in public records or social media." Linda opened a new document on her screen. "I'll send you a list of recommended questions and documentation procedures. Meanwhile, I'll start background investigation on your father's recent travel and business dealings, see if anything unusual shows up. My retainer is $2,000, covers approximately 10 hours of work. If this goes beyond that, we'll discuss additional funding. Are you comfortable moving forward with formal investigation?" I thought about what I was authorizing, hiring a private investigator to essentially spy on my own father, or the man claiming to be my father. It felt insane and necessary in equal measure. "Yes, do it. Whatever you find, I need to know the truth." We spent another 20 minutes going over logistics and paperwork that Linda would send over for signature. She asked detailed questions about my family's financial situation, whether there had been any unusual transactions or credit inquiries lately, anything that might suggest financial fraud as a motive for identity theft. I didn't have access to my parents' accounts but promised to ask Olivia to check for any strange mail or credit card offers. After the call ended, I sat staring at my laptop, trying to process that I'd just hired a private investigator to determine whether my father was actually my father. The absurdity of it would have been funny if it wasn't so terrifying. I called Olivia and filled her in, listening to her relief that someone professional was taking this seriously. "Linda's sending over a list of questions to ask Dad, stuff only he would know. You'll need to work them into conversations naturally so he doesn't realize he's being tested. Can you do that?" "Yes," Olivia said immediately. "I've already been doing that accidentally. Now I'll be more systematic about it." "What kind of questions?" "Deep childhood stuff, private family memories, specific dates and events that wouldn't be public knowledge. Like ask him about the first concert he ever went to, or what his college roommate's name was, details that aren't on Facebook or in family photo albums." Over the next 3 days, Olivia sent me updates every night at midnight. She'd asked Dad about his childhood dog's name, and he'd hesitated before saying, Buddy, but family photo albums she'd checked labeled the dog as Chester. She'd asked about the scar on his left knee, and he'd claimed it was from a bicycle accident. But the real story, which I remembered Dad telling me dozens of times, involved falling through a rotten dock at his uncle's lake house when he was 9. She'd asked him to make his famous Sunday pancakes, and he'd looked confused before claiming he didn't have time. But our real father made pancakes every Sunday morning from memory, never needed a recipe, and considered it a sacred tradition. Each wrong answer stacked onto the pile of evidence, building a case that felt increasingly undeniable. The man living in my parents' house had enough knowledge about Richard Carlyle to fool casual acquaintances, and even my mother apparently, but lacked the deep memory and automatic knowledge that came from actually being him. On the 4th day, Linda called with preliminary findings from her investigation. "I've been looking into your father's recent activities and found some concerning patterns. First, the Denver conference he attended. I contacted the hotel and verified he checked in on June 8th as scheduled. But here's where it gets interesting. The hotel has security footage of him checking out on June 10th, 2 days early, and leaving in a rental car with another man. The conference ran through the 12th, so why would he leave early? I felt my pulse accelerate. Do you have a description of the other man? White male, approximately 6 feet tall, similar build to your father, wearing a baseball cap that obscured his face from most camera angles. They left together around noon on the 10th, seemed to be in conversation, not hostile or confrontational. The hotel staff didn't think anything of it because your father paid his bill and checked out properly. But it means for 2 days, June 10th through 12th, we don't know where your father actually was. He told your mother he was at the conference through the 12th, returned home on the 13th. So he lied about his location for 2 days, or someone lied on his behalf. The implications were stacking wrong in my head. Could be either. I'm trying to track the rental car, see where it went after leaving the hotel. I've also been researching similar cases to the one I mentioned, identity substitution for financial fraud. Found 6 documented cases in the past decade across the U.S., all following similar patterns. Middle-aged men with stable finances and good credit, traveling alone for business, going missing briefly, then returning different, according to family members. In 4 of those cases, the men were eventually found deceased, and imposters were arrested trying to drain their accounts. The room felt like it was tilting. You're telling me my father might be dead, and we've been living with his murderer for 2 weeks? Linda's voice stayed calm, professional. I'm telling you the pattern matches documented criminal behavior, and we need to take this seriously. But we don't have proof yet of anything criminal. It's equally possible your father is alive but compromised in some way, held somewhere while an associate pretends to be him. Or this could still be an elaborate misunderstanding, though I find that increasingly unlikely given the evidence. What I need now is DNA comparison. Do you have anything with your father's DNA from before the Denver trip? Hair samples, old toothbrush, anything he touched that might have epithelial cells? I thought desperately through what might still exist at my Chicago apartment. I have a coffee mug he used when he visited me last Christmas. Never washed it. Just stuck it in a box of stuff I was storing. Would that work? Potentially, if there's enough saliva residue. Ship it to me overnight, along with any other items you can think of from before June 8th. Meanwhile, I need your sister to collect current samples from the man in your house. Hair from his brush, used tissue, toothbrush if she can access it without being caught. We'll run comparisons and see if we're dealing with the same person or different individuals. The next day, I sent Linda the mug via overnight shipping, carefully wrapped to preserve any biological material. Olivia managed to collect hair samples from the bathroom and a used tissue from the trash, sealing them in plastic bags and mailing them from a post office across town so no one would track the package to Linda's office. While we waited for DNA results, which Linda warned could take up to 2 weeks through the private lab she used, I started researching Richard Carlisle's professional life more thoroughly. His LinkedIn showed normal activity through early June, posts about industry trends and client meetings. But starting June 13th, the day he returned from Denver, the posting style changed subtly. Where before he'd written in complete sentences with proper punctuation, recent posts were more casual, looser grammar, different vocabulary. It could have been nothing, a shift in communication style, or it could be another person writing posts that were meant to seem like him. I created a spreadsheet documenting every inconsistency Olivia had reported, every failed knowledge test, every behavioral change. The list grew to 38 items by the end of the week. Wrong coffee order, wrong grocery store, forgotten family dog's name, incorrect scar story, missing Sunday pancake tradition, forgotten anniversary details, wrong cologne, new shoes never seen before, unfamiliar way of holding silverware, stopped taking shoes off at the door, failed to recognize old family friends at church, couldn't remember password to family Netflix account, claimed to have allergies to foods he'd eaten for years, forgot names of co-workers he'd worked with for a decade, didn't know location of spare key that real dad had hidden in the same spot for 20 years. On day 9, Linda called with preliminary DNA results. Her voice was tight when she answered. All business. We have a problem. The DNA from the coffee mug you sent me doesn't match the DNA from the samples your sister collected. These are 2 different people. The confirmation hit like a physical blow, despite having suspected this for days. So that's not my father living in my parents' house. No, Mr. Carlisle, it's not. I'm recommending we contact law enforcement immediately. This is beyond private investigation now. We have evidence of identity fraud at minimum, potentially kidnapping or worse. I've already prepared documentation for the FBI's Identity Theft Division, but I need your permission to file an official report. My hands were shaking so badly I had to set down my phone and put it on speaker. What happens when we file the report? What happens to the man in my house? FBI will want to investigate before making any moves that might alert the subject. They'll likely put your family under surveillance, gather their own evidence, try to determine if this is part of a larger criminal operation. Based on similar cases, this could take anywhere from a few days to a few weeks before they make an arrest. Meanwhile, your sister and mother are living with someone who is impersonating your father for unknown purposes. That's the immediate danger we need to address. I thought about Olivia hiding in her closet at midnight, scared and alone, trying to act normal around a stranger wearing our father's face. We need to get my sister out of that house without alerting him that we know. Linda was quiet for a moment. Agreed. But how do we do that without raising suspicion? If she suddenly leaves or your mother pulls her out of the house, the imposter will know something is wrong and might run or escalate. We need FBI involvement first, proper surveillance and protection in place before we extract your family. Then let's file the report today. Right now. Whatever you need from me to make that happen. Linda walked me through the process. She'd contact Special Agent David Kowalski at the FBI's Indianapolis field office, someone she'd worked with during her years in law enforcement who specialized in identity theft and fraud cases. She'd present our evidence, the DNA results, the behavioral documentation, the Denver hotel footage showing Dad leaving early with an unknown man. Kowalski would determine whether there was enough to open a formal investigation. This could move fast once the FBI gets involved, Linda warned. They'll want to identify the imposter, determine how he knew enough about your father to attempt this substitution, and most urgently, locate your real father. If he's still alive, time is critical. If he's not, they'll be looking at homicide charges in addition to identity fraud. I spent the next several hours on phone calls with Linda and Special Agent Kowalski, a man with a gruff voice and an apparent appreciation for thorough documentation. He reviewed everything we'd gathered, asked detailed questions about my last interaction with my real father, wanted exact timelines and descriptions. The DNA evidence is compelling, Kowalski said during our second call. Combined with the behavioral documentation and the hotel footage, we have probable cause to investigate. I'm assigning a team to this as of right now. We'll put the residents under surveillance starting tomorrow, track the subject's movements, see if he contacts anyone or engages in suspicious activity. Meanwhile, I need you to maintain normal contact with your family. Call your mother like you usually would. Don't change your patterns. If the subject is smart enough to pull off this level of impersonation, he's smart enough to notice behavioral changes that might indicate we're onto him. What about my sister? She knows the truth. She's terrified living in that house. Kowalski's voice softened slightly. Your sister showed remarkable instincts catching the inconsistencies, but she needs to continue acting normal for a few more days while we build our case. I'll have agents watching the house 24/7. If anything escalates or she's in immediate danger, we'll extract her immediately. But right now, we need time to figure out who this person is and what he wants. Running him off before we have those answers means we might never find your real father. The logic made sense, even as it felt impossible to leave Olivia in danger. I called her that night at our usual midnight check-in, speaking carefully in case anyone was monitoring her phone. Help is coming. Professional help. You need to act completely normal for a few more days, okay? Can you do that? Olivia's voice was steady despite the circumstances. I can do that. How much longer? Maybe a week, maybe less. There are people watching the house now, keeping you safe even if you can't see them. If anything feels wrong or dangerous, call 911 immediately and they'll respond. But if you can hold on just a little longer, we're going to figure out what happened to Dad. Do you think he's alive? The question she'd been avoiding asking, the one I'd been avoiding answering. I don't know, but people are looking for him now, professionals with resources we don't have. We're doing everything possible. After we hung up, I sat in my dark apartment trying to process the surreal reality that my father was missing, possibly dead, and a stranger was living in his place, sleeping in his bed, eating meals with his wife, who apparently didn't notice or wouldn't acknowledge the substitution. The questions piled up faster than answers. Who was the imposter? How had he learned enough about Richard Carlisle to fool my mother? What was his endgame? And most desperately, where was my real father? Over the next 4 days, Special Agent Kowalski sent me daily updates on the surveillance operation. The imposter maintained regular routines, going to Dad's job at Mid-America Industrial Solutions, coming home for dinner, watching TV with Mom in the evenings. Nothing overtly suspicious except for one detail that made my blood run cold. On day 3 of surveillance, the imposter received a visitor at his office, a man fitting the description of the person seen leaving the Denver hotel with my real father. They met for 20 minutes in a conference room, and FBI lip readers analyzed security footage but couldn't determine the conversation content due to poor camera angles. The visitor left and disappeared before surveillance teams could effectively follow him, getting into a car that turned out to be registered under a fake name at a fake address. This is part of a larger operation, Kowalski told me on our daily call. One imposter might be a crime of opportunity, but coordinated visits from associates suggest an organized ring. We're running the visitor's description through facial recognition databases, checking for similar cases in other jurisdictions, trying to map the full scope of this operation. And my father? Any leads on where he might be? Kowalski hesitated before answering, and I knew the news wasn't good. We've been checking hospitals, morgues, and unidentified persons reports across a 6-state area. Nothing so far, which could be positive or negative. If he were dead and discovered, we'd likely have found him by now. The fact that we haven't suggests he might be alive but hidden somewhere, possibly held captive if he's still valuable to whoever is behind this. On day 6, something changed. Olivia called me at 10 p.m. instead of our usual midnight time, her voice high with panic. Nathan, you need to get people here now. Mom just told me they're planning a trip. She and Dad are taking me out of school early, and we're driving to visit her sister in Florida starting tomorrow morning. But Nathan, we don't have an aunt in Florida. Mom's sister lives in Ohio. When I pointed that out, Mom got really weird and defensive, said I was misremembering, that her sister moved to Florida last year. But I know she didn't. I just talked to Aunt Rebecca last month and she was in Cleveland. The change in pattern triggered every alarm. They're trying to move you. Get you isolated somewhere. Don't go. Tell them you're sick, you have a test you can't miss, anything to delay. I already tried that. Mom got angry in a way I've never seen before, told me I was being difficult, and we were leaving tomorrow morning whether I liked it or not. She's packing right now and Dad, or whoever he is loading the car. Nathan, I think they're going to do something to me. I think they're getting rid of anyone who might figure out the truth. I was already on the phone with Kowalski before she finished speaking, three-way calling him into the conversation. He listened to Olivia's report and made a decision immediately. We're moving now. I'm sending teams to the house for extraction and arrest. Olivia, I need you to go to your room, lock your door, push furniture against it if you can. Stay on the line with your brother. We'll be there in less than 10 minutes. I could hear Olivia moving, breathing hard as she ran upstairs. A door slammed and I heard furniture scraping across the floor. I'm in my room. Door's locked. I pushed my desk against it. Through the phone, faintly, I could hear my mother's voice calling up the stairs. Olivia? What are you doing up there? Come help me pack. Don't answer, Kowalski said, his voice tight. Teams are 3 minutes out. The longest 3 minutes of my life. I listened to Olivia's ragged breathing, heard Mom's voice getting closer, calling more insistently. Then footsteps on the stairs, heavy ones that must have been the imposter. A knock on Olivia's door. Sweetheart, open up. Your mother needs your help. The fake gentleness in his voice, so much like Dad's tone but wrong enough that even over the phone I could tell it wasn't him. Olivia, I know you're scared, the voice continued. I know you've been suspicious. We need to talk about this, all of us together. Just open the door. Don't, I said, as if she needed the reminder. Teams are almost there. More knocking, harder now. Olivia, this isn't a request. Open the door right now. Then Mom's voice, sharper than I'd ever heard it. Break it down. We don't have time for this. The sound of wood splintering came through the phone, someone hitting the door hard enough to crack the frame. Olivia screamed and I shouted her name uselessly from 300 miles away. Then new sounds, loud and official. FBI, everyone on the ground now, hands where we can see them. Shouting, confusion, Olivia crying. Kowalski's voice in my ear. Teams are in the house. Your sister is safe. We have 2 suspects in custody. The call disconnected, and I sat frozen in my apartment, heart hammering, not knowing what had just happened, or if Olivia was truly safe. My phone rang 2 minutes later, Kowalski's number. Your sister is unharmed, shaken up but physically fine. We have the imposter in custody along with your mother, who was actively helping him attempt to abduct your sister. They were going to take her to what we believe is a secondary location where previous victims were held or disposed of. Your sister's instincts likely saved her life. My mother was helping him? That doesn't make sense. Why would she help someone impersonate her husband? Kowalski's voice was grim. Because she knew he wasn't her husband. We're still piecing together the full story, but initial interrogation suggests your mother has been complicit from the beginning. This wasn't a case of failing to notice the substitution. She actively participated in it. The betrayal hit differently than the imposter revelation had. My father was a victim of some criminal operation, but my mother had chosen to be part of it, had helped replace her own husband with a stranger, and tried to maintain the deception even when her own daughter figured it out. Why? What could possibly motivate her to do that? Money, Kowalski said simply. Large amounts of money. The imposter had been systematically draining your father's accounts, taking out loans using his identity, running up credit card debt. Your mother received a cut of the proceeds in exchange for helping maintain the deception and providing insider knowledge about your father's life, habits, history. When your sister started asking questions, your mother became a liability to the operation. They were going to take her somewhere remote and, based on how these organizations typically operate, likely kill her to prevent exposure. I felt sick, actually physically ill at the image of my mother participating in a scheme that would end with her own daughter's murder. And Dad? Have you found him? Not yet, Kowalski admitted. But your mother is talking now, trying to negotiate a plea deal. She's given us locations to search. We have teams deploying to 3 sites in rural Indiana where victims have been held in the past. If your father is still alive, we'll find him in the next 24 hours. I drove through the night from Chicago to Indianapolis, arriving at the FBI field office at dawn. They brought Olivia to me in a conference room, and we held on to each other while she cried, and I tried to process that our mother had tried to have her killed. Special Agent Kowalski walked us through what they'd learned. The imposter's real name was Gerald Vance, a career criminal with a history of identity fraud and confidence schemes. He'd been part of an organized ring that targeted middle-aged men with good credit and stable finances, studying their lives through social media and public records, then creating opportunities to abduct them during business trips or other solo travel. Once the victim was secured, an imposter with similar physical features would take their place, supported by detailed dossiers and often a complicit family member who received payment for helping maintain the deception. Your mother was recruited 6 months ago, Kowalski explained. She'd been having an affair with Gerald Vance, met him through an online dating site she'd been using while your father traveled for work. Vance identified her as a potential inside asset and gradually brought her into the operation. She provided detailed information about your father's life, habits, memories, everything Vance would need to impersonate him. The plan was to substitute Vance for your father, drain his accounts and take out substantial loans over a period of 6 to 8 weeks, then disappear with the money while making it look like Richard Carlisle had simply run off and abandoned his family. But I noticed too quickly, Olivia said, her voice small. I started asking questions before they'd finished the financial fraud part, so I became a problem that needed to be eliminated. Kowalski nodded. Your attention to detail disrupted their timeline. Most families don't notice the substitution, or notice too late to prevent significant financial damage. Your sister's observations and willingness to trust her instincts saved not only her own life, but likely prevented this ring from claiming more victims. We've identified at least 6 other cases across 3 states with the same pattern. Your family's case is the first time we've caught the operation in progress with witnesses alive to provide evidence. What about Dad? I asked again, unable to focus on anything else until I knew. Is he alive? Kowalski pulled out his phone and showed me a photo time-stamped 2 hours ago. My father, looking gaunt and exhausted but unmistakably alive, sitting in what appeared to be a hospital room. We found him at a location your mother provided. He'd been held in a basement property outside Bloomington, sedated periodically to keep him compliant. He's dehydrated and undernourished but expected to make a full physical recovery. Mentally and emotionally, there will be trauma to work through. But he's alive, Nathan. Your father is alive. The relief was so intense I couldn't speak for several seconds, just stared at the photo of Dad, trying to match this hollow-eyed version with the robust man I'd seen 3 weeks ago at Mom's birthday. Can we see him? Kowalski checked his watch. He's at IU Health Hospital in Bloomington undergoing medical evaluation. I can have you transported there within the hour. He's been asking about both of you since we found him. Needed constant reassurance that you were safe before he'd let doctors treat him fully. The drive to Bloomington was surreal, Olivia and I both silent as we processed everything that had happened in the past 2 weeks. When we walked into Dad's hospital room and he saw us, he broke down completely, crying in a way I'd never seen him cry, reaching for both of us with shaking hands. I'm sorry, he kept saying. I'm so sorry. I tried to get away, tried to warn you. When they grabbed me in Denver, all I could think about was getting back to you and your sister. I thought they'd kill me immediately, but they kept me alive as leverage in case the impersonation failed. Said if anyone figured it out, they'd use me to threaten the family into silence. Olivia was sobbing against his chest, and I was trying to hold myself together enough to be functional. We figured it out, I told him. Olivia knew immediately something was wrong. She saved all of us. Over the next hours, Dad told us what had happened. He'd been at the Denver conference, returning to his hotel room after a dinner meeting, when 2 men ambushed him in the hallway. They'd drugged him with something fast-acting, loaded him into a service elevator, and transported him out of the hotel in a laundry cart. By the time he regained consciousness, he was in a basement somewhere, bound and guarded. They'd taken his phone, his wallet, everything. For 2 weeks he'd been held there, moved once to a different location when they worried the first site might be compromised. The guards had told him enough for him to understand what was happening, that someone was living his life, that Claire was part of it, that if he cooperated and stayed quiet, maybe they'd let him go eventually. He hadn't believed the last part, knew too much about how these operations worked to think they'd leave witnesses alive. His only hope had been that someone would notice the substitution and investigate, that Olivia or I would realize something was wrong. I knew you'd figure it out, he said to Olivia, gripping her hand. I knew you'd notice things wrong. You've always been so observant, so smart. I just didn't know if you'd be safe while you figured it out, if they'd hurt you before you could get help. The trial happened 6 months later. Mom, Gerald Vance, and 4 other members of the identity theft ring all faced charges ranging from kidnapping to fraud to attempted murder. The prosecution had overwhelming evidence, DNA tests proving the imposter wasn't Richard Carlisle, documentation of the financial fraud, testimony from Dad about his captivity, Olivia's detailed observations and knowledge testing, the surveillance footage from Denver, and most damningly, recorded phone calls between Mom and Vance discussing how to handle Olivia's suspicions. Mom's lawyer tried to argue she'd been manipulated and abused by Vance, that she'd been afraid for her own safety and coerced into cooperation. But the prosecution presented text messages showing her actively planning the fraud, celebrating the money they were stealing, and discussing what to do about Olivia in terms that made clear she understood and accepted that her daughter would need to be eliminated to protect the operation. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Gerald Vance received 35 years for kidnapping, fraud, and attempted murder. Mom received 25 years for conspiracy to commit kidnapping, accessory to fraud, and child endangerment. The other members of the ring received sentences ranging from 15 to 28 years. At sentencing, Mom finally looked at us, at Dad and Olivia and me sitting in the front row of the courtroom. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, some explanation or apology, but then closed it again. The judge asked if she had any statement before sentencing. No, Your Honor, she said quietly. That was it. No explanation for why she'd betrayed her family, why she'd chosen money and an affair over her husband's life and her children's safety. Just silence. Dad, Olivia, and I moved to Indianapolis after everything was settled, far enough from Terre Haute to feel like a fresh start, but close enough that Dad could keep his job with Mid-America Industrial Solutions, who'd been surprisingly supportive throughout the ordeal. Olivia graduated high school with honors and got accepted to IU like she'd planned, though she deferred a year to process everything through therapy before starting college. Dad and I both see therapists regularly, working through different flavors of the same trauma. His focus is on the captivity and betrayal by someone he'd trusted for 30 years. Mine focuses on the guilt I carry for not noticing sooner, for having talked to the imposter on the phone and not immediately knowing it wasn't Dad. Olivia sees a therapist who specializes in parental betrayal and family violence, helping her understand that her mother's choices weren't her fault and that noticing the truth doesn't make her responsible for it. We're all works in progress, learning to trust again after having foundational safety shattered. But we're together. We're safe. And the people who tried to destroy our family are in prison where they belong. Sometimes that feels like enough. Sometimes it doesn't. But we keep going anyway, because that's what you do when someone tries to erase your life and you refuse to let them win. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.